If you're really that smart, read it, the billionaire said, loud enough for half the dining room to hear, and by the time the laughter faded, the woman holding his tray had already seen the one detail that would cost his most trusted executive everything. The Marlowe Room on East 57th was the kind of restaurant where men in custom suits spoke softly about eight-figure deals and women in diamonds smiled without ever really laughing. Crystal stemware caught the amber glow of the chandeliers. Silverware flashed like tiny mirrors. Outside, Manhattan moved in cold November wind, but inside, everything was warm, polished, expensive, and carefully controlled. Ethan Caldwell liked places like that. Places where nothing happened unless he allowed it. At 38, Ethan had built Caldwell Ventures into one of the most aggressive private equity firms on the East Coast, and the city had learned to read him the way traders read markets. His silence meant calculation. His half-smile meant danger. And tonight, with a private dinner unfolding beneath low golden light and a table full of investors hanging on every word, he looked exactly like the kind of man who had never once been wrong in public. Claire Bennett had been serving table 12 for 43 minutes when he decided to notice her. She moved the way excellent waitresses always did, quietly, precisely, almost invisibly. Refill the water before anyone asked. Clear the appetizer plates before a single fork was set down. Replace a napkin without interrupting a sentence. Blonde hair pinned back. White shirt pressed flat. Black apron tied neatly at the waist. To most people in the room, she was part of the machinery. Useful. Forgettable. But Claire had learned a long time ago that being overlooked was sometimes the safest place in the world. You caught that decimal fast, one of the investors had joked a minute earlier, surprised when Claire, while setting down a 12-ounce fillet, had calmly corrected a mistaken number in a passing conversation about a valuation model. It should have ended there. A small moment. A forgotten remark. But Ethan Caldwell had looked up then, really looked up, and the expression in his gray eyes had shifted. Curiosity first. Then amusement. Then that familiar, dangerous spark men like him got when they believed they'd found a game. Interesting, he'd said, leaning back in his chair. Beside him sat Victor Lang, Caldwell Ventures CFO for nearly a decade, silver at the temples, navy tie perfectly centered, the kind of man who always looked as if he belonged near confidential numbers and locked conference rooms. Victor had smiled politely when Claire set down the check presenter from another cleared table, but Claire noticed what most people never did. He was watching Ethan, not the room. Watching for mood. Watching for cues. Watching to stay one half-step ahead. You think she's smart? Ethan asked the table, lifting a folded slip of paper between two fingers. Let's test that. A few men laughed automatically. The kind of laugh that came from people too rich to know when they were being cruel. Claire stood still, tray balanced against her palm, face composed in the neutral professionalism that years in fine dining had carved into muscle memory. Ethan slid the paper across the white linen toward the edge of the table. Read this receipt if you're so smart. More laughter. Softer now. Expectant. Claire stepped forward because that was what her job required. She reached down, lifted the slip, and for one brief second the entire room became smaller. The paper was warm from his hand. Thin. Slightly creased. At first glance, it looked like any standard itemized receipt. Merchant line. Tax line. Tip line. Total. But the tax code was wrong for Manhattan. The subtotal had been rounded in a way no restaurant system would ever allow. The font on the final line was half a shade darker than the rest. And in the bottom right corner, nearly hidden beside the authorization string, sat two tiny characters most people would miss even if they stared at them for an hour, VL 7. Claire felt something cold and familiar move through her chest. Not fear. Recognition. She lifted her eyes slowly, and for the first time that night, she didn't look at the billionaire. She looked at his CFO. Victor Lang did not move at first, and somehow that made the moment louder. The laughter around the table thinned into something brittle, uncertain, as if every man there suddenly realized he might have missed a rule no one had explained. Claire held the slip delicately between two fingers, careful not to crease it further. Her expression did not change. That was the part Ethan noticed before anything else. No embarrassment. No irritation. No need to defend herself. Just stillness. "Is there a problem?" Ethan asked, the edge in his voice returning, though it was softer now, more controlled. Claire lowered her eyes to the paper one more time, then spoke in the same calm tone she had used all evening to ask whether anyone wanted still or sparkling water. "This is not a restaurant receipt, sir." The investor to Ethan's left let out a short laugh, thinking perhaps this was part of the joke. "Looks like one to me." Claire nodded once, respectful, almost gentle. "It is meant to." She set the tray on the service stand beside the table and laid the paper flat on the linen, turning it slightly so the overhead light hit the ink. "The merchant code is wrong for this zip code. The tax line was added after the subtotal, not before it. And the tip line is mathematically impossible. It was inserted after the total had already been closed." Silence. Real silence this time. Ethan leaned forward. The casual arrogance had left his posture. In its place was attention. Sharp, immediate, dangerous in a different way. "You are saying someone fabricated it?" Claire did not answer right away. She touched the bottom corner with one fingertip. "I am saying someone wanted it to look ordinary." Victor reached for his water glass. Too quickly. The crystal tapped lightly against his wedding band. It was a tiny sound, almost nothing, but Claire heard it the way some people heard a false note in a piano piece. "And I am saying they forgot to remove a draft mark." Her finger hovered over the lower right corner. Ethan squinted. One of the investors pulled out reading glasses. "What mark?" Claire looked up, and again, she did not look at Ethan. She looked directly at Victor. VL-7. Victor gave a tight smile, practiced and polished. That could mean anything. It could, Claire said. If the rounding pattern did not match. Ethan's eyes narrowed. Rounding pattern? She nodded. 3 amounts on this document were adjusted in increments of $7.50. That is not a restaurant system behavior. It is manual smoothing. It is usually done when someone is trying to split a reimbursement into categories that will not trigger automatic review. One of the men across the table slowly lowered his fork. Another glanced at Victor, then back at the paper. The room around them continued in low murmurs and soft jazz, but table 12 had become its own sealed world. Ethan looked at Claire now the way he looked at acquisition targets. Carefully. Thoroughly. "How," he asked, each word precise, "does a waitress know that?" Claire folded her hands lightly in front of her apron. "Because numbers leave habits behind." Victor gave a quiet chuckle that sounded almost convincing. "This is absurd. Ethan, with all due respect, we are turning a dinner into theater because your server watches crime documentaries." A few forced smiles flickered around the table, but no one fully committed. Ethan did not smile. He kept looking at Claire. "Answer the question." For the first time all night, something softer moved across her face. Not weakness. Memory. 2 years at Columbia. Forensic accounting. 1 internship in corporate fraud review before I left school. A pause. Life changed. She did not elaborate. She did not need to. In the reflection of the wine glass, Ethan could see his own expression hardening, not at her, but at himself. He had tried to humiliate a woman who had spotted in 10 seconds what his own finance team had apparently missed. Or hidden. Claire took a small step back, giving the table space, giving the truth room to land. "If I am wrong," she said quietly, "then it is only paper." Her eyes returned to Victor. "If I am right, then someone has been billing trust as an expense." Ethan Caldwell had built his fortune on one rule above all others: when something felt wrong, he did not wait for morning. He did not wait for legal. He did not wait for polished explanations in conference rooms with soundproof glass and catered coffee. He acted. The table watched him in complete silence as he reached into the inside pocket of his charcoal jacket and pulled out his phone. No hesitation. No theatrics. Just one smooth motion and a face that had gone from amused to unreadable. Victor Lang straightened in his chair. "Ethan," he said, still calm, still composed, "we are not seriously doing this because a server made a dramatic guess over dessert." Ethan did not look at him. He pressed one contact and lifted the phone to his ear. "Mara. I need secure access to reimbursement logs for discretionary executive approvals. Last 90 days. Priority 1. Yes, right now." Across the table, one investor slowly set down his wine glass. Another glanced toward the far end of the dining room, then back again, as if checking whether anyone else had noticed the temperature at table 12 drop by 10 degrees. Claire stood with her hands lightly folded, neither defensive nor triumphant. That was the part Victor hated most. She was not acting like someone who had scored a point. She was acting like someone who had simply pointed at a crack in the wall and waited for everyone else to see it. "This is ridiculous," Victor said, with a softer laugh than before. "You know how many draft codes pass through my office in a week? Hundreds. VL could mean vendor ledger, volume line, any number of internal tags. You are allowing a coincidence to embarrass the firm in front of investors." Ethan finally looked up. The look was not loud. It was worse than loud. "Then this will take 30 seconds. Victor opened his mouth, then closed it. The line connected. Ethan tapped the phone once, activating a privacy screen. Numbers and internal access prompts flashed blue across the glass. He angled it away from the table, but not far enough to hide the fact that he was already inside the system. "Pull all approvals with manual rounding adjustments over $5. Cross-reference with vendor reimbursements under hospitality and client entertainment. Filter for any draft marker ending in -7. He listened. His jaw tightened. "Read them to me." No one at the table touched a plate. No one reached for a fork. The jazz from the piano near the bar drifted through the room like it belonged to another universe. Claire noticed a candle flicker near the center of the table, the flame bending slightly in the vented air above the chandelier. Small things. Tiny movements. She had always trusted tiny movements. 3 entries, the voice on the phone said faintly enough that only Ethan could fully hear it, but his expression was enough. "Dates?" he asked. Another pause. "Amounts?" Longer pause. Then something changed in his face. Not shock. Confirmation. He lowered the phone slowly and looked at the paper again, then at Victor, then at Claire. 3 entries, he repeated aloud. All under hospitality. All manually rounded in $7.50 increments. One investor exhaled under his breath. Another muttered, "Jesus," so softly it barely reached the linen. Victor leaned back as if offended by the implication, but the movement was too controlled, too deliberate, and Ethan saw it now. The overcorrection. The polished indignation. The man had always been good at staying half a beat ahead of suspicion. Tonight, he was 1 beat behind. "That proves nothing," Victor said. "It proves pattern," Claire answered quietly. Ethan's eyes shifted to her again. "Keep talking." She looked at the slip, then at the untouched dessert spoon beside the investor's coffee cup. If someone is disguising internal reimbursements as ordinary hospitality expenses, they usually count on one thing. Executives do not read small receipts. They read totals. Auditors do not always catch what looks routine if the categories are familiar enough. But people who live on hourly wages read every line. Her voice remained calm, but something deeper moved beneath it now, something old and earned. When you have $42 left until Friday, you notice what should not be there. Ethan stared at her for a long second, and for the first time since she had approached the table, he seemed to understand that the woman in the black apron was not simply intelligent. She was precise because life had trained her to be. He turned back to Victor. Tell me why my CFO is connected to 3 manually altered reimbursements with a draft mark matching his initials. Victor smiled again, but it came too late. Because initials are not evidence. Ethan's voice dropped low enough that the men around him leaned in without meaning to. No. But panic is. And at that exact moment, Victor's phone lit up on the white tablecloth with a message preview that none of them were meant to see: transfer hold triggered. Call me now. The message glowed on the white tablecloth for less than 2 seconds, but that was all it took. Transfer hold triggered. Call me now. No name. No signature. Just enough to say what mattered. Victor saw it at the same instant Ethan did, and the color left his face so subtly that anyone less observant might have missed it. Claire did not miss it. She had spent years learning the language of almost invisible reactions. The quick inhale. The fingers tightening around a water glass. The smile arriving half a second too late. Panic rarely shouted. It usually whispered. Victor reached for the phone. Ethan moved first. Not with force, not with drama, just a flat hand placed over the device before Victor could touch it. The gesture was simple. Final. Leave it, Ethan said. His voice was so quiet that everyone at the table heard it. Victor gave a strained laugh. You cannot be serious. Ethan did not blink. For once, I am being very serious. Around them, dinner service continued. A waiter passed with a tray of sea bass. Someone at the bar laughed too loudly. A server near the back polished wine stems beneath soft amber light. But table 12 had become a closed room inside the room, a private collapse unfolding beneath chandeliers and white linen. Victor straightened his tie with fingers that were no longer perfectly steady. A delayed transfer could mean anything. Payroll. Vendor processing. Treasury timing. We are turning coincidence into accusation because a waitress wants to feel important. It was the first cruel thing he had said directly to Claire, and the investors noticed. Ethan noticed too. Claire did not react. She had heard worse from men with less money and smaller watches. She only looked at the phone still trapped under Ethan's hand, then at the folded slip on the table. If it were payroll, she said softly, the message would not say transfer hold. It would say batch delay or ACH issue. If it were treasury timing, it would not arrive privately in the middle of your dinner. And if it were ordinary, he would not have reached for it before you finished speaking. The investor across from Ethan slowly leaned back in his chair. That is, actually a fair point. Victor turned toward him with polished disbelief. You are not seriously taking operational advice from restaurant staff. No, the man said, eyes fixed on Victor now. I think we are taking pattern recognition from the only person at this table who is not pretending this is normal. Ethan lifted his hand from Victor's phone and slid it across the linen toward himself. Victor's voice sharpened. That is private property. Ethan picked it up anyway. It is also on my table, in the middle of a conversation about my money. He glanced at the preview again. And apparently, my timing. Victor stood halfway, then thought better of it and sat back down. That tiny aborted movement said more than any explanation he could have offered. Ethan unlocked his own phone again. Mara, he said the second the line opened, freeze all outgoing transfers tied to hospitality vendors approved by Victor Lang in the last 90 days. All of them. Then send internal audit to conference room B and wake legal. A pause. I do not care what time it is. The investors exchanged glances. No one interrupted him now. No one smiled. No one treated Claire like background furniture anymore. She stood beside the service station, still and composed, but her pulse had begun to climb. Not because she was afraid. Because she knew what came next. Truth had a rhythm. First denial. Then paperwork. Then the moment someone realized the paperwork could actually talk. Victor leaned in, lowering his voice, trying to recover control through intimacy, through old loyalty, through the years he had spent standing beside Ethan in boardrooms and private jets and closed-door negotiations. Ethan, listen to yourself. We have known each other for 9 years. 9 years. You are going to humiliate your chief financial officer in front of investors because a woman carrying a tray noticed a formatting issue? Ethan looked at him for a long, unreadable moment. No, he said at last. I am going to investigate my chief financial officer because the woman carrying a tray noticed what I should have. The words landed harder than anger ever could have. Victor looked toward Claire then, truly looked at her, and there was no politeness left in his face now. Only calculation. Only resentment. Only the cold realization that the person he had dismissed as invisible had become the one witness he could not control. Claire met his stare without blinking. Then, very gently, she picked up the folded slip again and turned it over. On the back, pressed faintly into the paper from the original printout beneath it, was the ghost of another line. A vendor name. Half visible. Just enough. Blackwell Advisory Group. For the first time that night, Victor Lang looked like a man who understood the floor beneath him had changed. His gaze dropped to the back of the slip in Claire's hand, and even before anyone else fully processed the faint imprint, the reaction on his face did it for them. It was tiny. Barely there. But it was enough. Ethan saw it. The investors saw it. And Claire, who had spent years reading what people tried hardest to hide, saw it more clearly than all of them. She turned the paper slightly under the chandelier light. The letters were pale, pressed through from the original sheet beneath the printed fake. Not ink. Pressure. The kind of trace most people would throw away without ever noticing. Blackwell Advisory Group, she said softly. No one at the table spoke for a beat. Then the investor on Ethan's right frowned. I know that name. Ethan's eyes shifted without leaving Victor completely. From where? Quarterly review packet in August, the man said, already thinking backward, searching memory. Small consulting line item. Nothing major. 74,000, maybe 76. Another investor lifted his head. It was 91 in September. I remember because I asked whether we were expanding outside counsel. Ethan's jaw tightened. We were not. Victor leaned back and folded his hands, trying one last time to wear composure like armor. Blackwell is a subcontracting compliance vendor. Temporary review support. There is nothing unusual about it. Claire looked at him, then at Ethan. Then why hide it inside a restaurant format? That landed harder than any accusation. Because it was not emotional. It was clean. Logical. The kind of question that did not need volume to cut. Ethan's phone buzzed again in his hand. Mara. He answered immediately. Talk. His eyes stayed on Victor as he listened. Then his face changed in a way that made the men around him sit straighter. Say that again. Claire did not move, but her pulse climbed another notch. She could feel it in her wrists, in the base of her throat, in the stillness she had learned to keep around people who thought power belonged only to them. Ethan ended the call slowly. Blackwell Advisory Group was incorporated 11 months ago in Delaware, he said, every word measured. No physical office. Shared registered agent. Payments from Caldwell Ventures total $482,000 over the last 3 quarters. One investor muttered a curse beneath his breath. Another stared openly at Victor now, the kind of stare men reserve for someone they had respected 5 minutes earlier. Victor gave a cold, disbelieving smile. Shell structures are common in consulting. That proves nothing. No, Claire said quietly. But the reimbursement disguises do. Ethan turned to her. Explain. She set the slip down flat again and pointed to the impossible tip line. If someone bills a fake vendor directly, audit eventually sees a vendor. But if they move a portion through executive hospitality or discretionary entertainment, it looks smaller. Familiar. Less interesting. Especially if the fake expense is buried in places no one expects anyone to read line by line. Her eyes lifted to Ethan, steady and clear. You were never meant to notice the paper. You were meant to dismiss it. The words hung there, and something sharp passed through Ethan's expression. Not anger at her. Anger at himself. He had built an empire by finding hidden leverage in plain sight. And tonight he had nearly mocked the one person who saw what his entire executive floor had missed. Or chosen not to see. Victor's voice hardened. Enough. This is becoming absurd. Ethan, if you want an audit, run one tomorrow. But humiliating your own chief financial officer in public based on forensic fantasy from a waitress is reckless, even for you. Ethan stood. Slowly. Deliberately. He was tall enough that the shift changed the whole energy of the table. Several nearby diners looked over now, sensing something had broken through the invisible rules of expensive restaurants. But Ethan did not raise his voice. Men like him did not need to. No, he said. Reckless was letting you near my books. Victor rose too, his chair scraping lightly across the hardwood. You are making a mistake. Possibly, Ethan said. But not the one you think. Claire took a small step back as the restaurant manager appeared at the edge of the room, uncertain, reading the tension but too experienced to interrupt. Ethan looked at him once and said, "No one leaves this table for 5 minutes." The manager froze, then nodded. Victor reached for his jacket. Ethan's gaze cut to him. Sit down. Victor did not. For one dangerous second, the room held its breath. Then Claire noticed something else. On the inside of Victor's half-open jacket, tucked into the leather folio pocket beside his phone, was the corner of another folded document. Same paper weight. Same thermal sheen. Same fake receipt stock. And this time, the visible total was not dinner-sized. It was 6 figures. Claire saw it before Ethan did. A second folded slip sat half-hidden inside Victor Lang's leather folio, caught in the narrow gap of his jacket as he shifted to stand. Same thin thermal paper. Same cheap sheen that did not belong anywhere near a man who approved 9-figure transactions. Same attempt to make fraud look forgettable. Her eyes locked on it for half a second, and that was all she needed. Mr. Caldwell, she said, her voice low and even, there is another one. Ethan's gaze snapped to Victor's jacket pocket. Victor's hand moved instinctively toward the folio, but too late. Ethan stepped around the chair. And plucked the folded slip free with the smooth confidence of a man who had spent his life taking control of rooms. Victor's face went flat. Not angry. Not embarrassed. Flat. The kind of expression people wore when they realized denial had stopped being useful. Ethan unfolded the paper in one clean motion. The investors leaned in without meaning to. The total sat near the bottom in sharp black print. $128,400.00. No dinner in Manhattan looked like that. Not even in a place like the Marlowe Room. That is private, Victor said again, but the words had lost all authority. Ethan ignored him. His eyes moved across the lines once, then again, slower this time. Hospitality reimbursement, he read. Client retention event. Napa Valley. He looked up. I was in Zurich that week. One of the investors stared. I was with you. Another frowned. And the board dinner was cancelled because of the weather. Victor inhaled, steadying himself for one last performance. These are placeholder documents. Draft support files. I carry them when I review discretionary expenses outside the office. That is not unusual. No, Claire said softly. But carrying 2 of them to dinner is. Ethan glanced at her, and for a brief moment, something like grim respect passed through his face. He set the second slip beside the first, aligning both papers on the table as if arranging evidence in a conference room instead of beside untouched dessert spoons and cooling coffee. Mara, he said into the phone, already dialing again, expand the freeze. Search all discretionary reimbursements tied to Blackwell Advisory Group, hospitality coding, or off-book executive entertainment. I want every entry flagged in the last 12 months. Also pull travel overlap. If I was not physically present, I want it marked in red. He listened. Then his eyes narrowed. How many? The pause that followed felt longer than it was. Then Ethan gave a short, humorless exhale. Of course there are. He ended the call and looked around the table. There are 11 entries so far. No one touched their glass. No one reached for the silverware. The restaurant around them had begun to notice now. Not the details, but the gravity. Nearby conversations lowered. The manager remained frozen near the edge of the room, pretending to supervise service while clearly waiting for instructions. Victor straightened his cuffs with deliberate precision, trying to reclaim the illusion of control through ritual. You are making this look worse than it is. Ethan almost smiled. That sentence should never come from a chief financial officer. Claire lowered her eyes to the 2 slips. Patterns. There were always patterns. The second document had the same impossible tax structure, the same altered tip line, the same $7.50 rounding behavior. But there was something else. A faint symbol near the merchant header. Not letters this time. A small embossed star, nearly invisible unless the light hit it just right. She tilted the paper slightly. There. A custom print mark. This was not generated in a restaurant system, she said. Ethan turned the slip toward her. I know that. Tell me what it was generated in. Claire traced the upper corner without touching the ink. Portable thermal printer. Probably a handheld field unit. Older style. The kind people use at temporary event stations or private transport check-ins. See the top margin? It is wider than restaurant point-of-sale systems. And the alignment drifts on the left edge. Whoever made these used the same machine more than once. One investor whispered, "Good Lord." Victor's eyes flashed toward her, and this time there was nothing polished left in them. Only contempt. How convenient, he said. The waitress is suddenly an expert in printers too. Claire met his stare. Calm. Unmoved. No. I am an expert in receipts. Because I have lived on them. Ethan's gaze shifted to her again, and the silence that followed felt heavier than anything said before. He looked back at Victor. You hid fake reimbursements inside categories no one reads, printed them on disposable paper, routed them through a shell vendor, and assumed no one would ever care enough to look closely. Victor's jaw tightened. Prove it. Ethan nodded once, almost as if he had been waiting for those exact words. Then his phone buzzed again. Mara. He answered, listened for 3 seconds, and his expression changed completely. Send it to my screen, he said. Now. A file opened. A transfer map. Vendor payments. Routing lines. Beneficiary chain. And at the very end of the chain, highlighted in red, was a personal trust account registered under a name Ethan knew all too well. Victoria Lang. Victor's wife. The red highlight on Ethan Caldwell's phone seemed to burn brighter than the chandelier light above them. Victoria Lang. The beneficiary line sat at the end of the transfer chain like a final insult, neat and clinical and impossible to explain away. For one suspended second, no one at the table breathed. Then Victor Lang smiled. It was a strange smile. Too calm. Too deliberate. The smile of a man who had just realized the truth was no longer deniable and had decided his only remaining weapon was confidence. "My wife has a trust," he said evenly. "That is not a crime." Ethan looked at him, expression carved from stone. "No," he said. "Receiving money routed through a shell vendor funded by my firm might be." Victor spread his hands slightly, as if presenting reason to a room that had become unreasonably emotional. "Or it might be deferred family estate planning. Consulting pass-through structures. Temporary allocations. You know how complex these instruments can look when they are pulled apart by people who only understand fragments." His eyes shifted toward Claire. "Especially when those fragments come from someone with half a degree and a tray." The insult was sharp enough that one of the investors visibly flinched. Claire did not. She had heard richer men say crueler things in kinder voices. She stood exactly as she had all evening, shoulders relaxed, hands still, gaze steady. But something in Ethan changed. Not anger. Not the hot kind. Something colder. Something cleaner. "You should be very careful," he said quietly, "about mocking the only person in this room who has not lied to me tonight." The words landed with such force that even Victor seemed to feel them. He shifted his weight, the first true crack in his posture. Ethan turned the phone toward the nearest investor, then the next, letting each of them see the transfer chain for themselves. Blackwell Advisory Group. Layered reimbursements. Hospitality codes. Split approvals. Final beneficiary. Victoria Lang Family Trust. Men who had spent their lives evaluating risk looked at the screen and saw the same thing at the same time. Exposure. One of them sat back and muttered, "This is board-level fraud." Another shook his head slowly. "This is prison-level stupidity." Victor gave a tight, offended laugh. "Please. You are all acting as though a partial routing map is a conviction. Ethan, you know better than this. Numbers without context are theater." Claire's eyes flicked to the second slip on the table. One detail still bothered her. Not the totals. Not the codes. The date. She picked it up carefully and read it again. Napa Valley. Client retention event. Then she looked at Ethan. What date was the cancelled board dinner? Ethan did not need to check. September 12th. Claire nodded once. Then this document is worse than fake. Victor's eyes sharpened. Ethan caught it. Why? He asked. Claire held up the slip just enough for the light to strike the thermal paper. Because September 12th was a Tuesday. The investor on Ethan's left frowned. So. Claire turned the paper and pointed to the merchant header. Private transport check-in printers used for event shuttles stamp their internal date template with day of week if the operator does not disable it. This one says Saturday. Silence. The kind that felt physical. She lowered the slip. Someone built the receipt from a reusable template and forgot to change the system day. Ethan stared at her, then at the slip, then at Victor. Tell me, he said, voice now almost gentle, how your fake Napa event managed to happen on a Saturday when the Real board dinner was cancelled on a Tuesday. Victor's composure finally cracked. It was not dramatic. It was smaller than that. More human. More pathetic. His jaw tightened. His nostrils flared. He looked toward the exit, toward the manager, toward the investors, toward anywhere except the woman in the black apron who had quietly taken apart a year of deception with nothing but 2 scraps of paper and a lifetime of learning how to notice what others ignored. Ethan saw the glance toward the door and stepped slightly, just enough to block the cleanest path out. Sit down, Victor. This time, Victor did. Slowly. The restaurant manager approached, pale and careful. "Mr. Caldwell, is everything all right?" Ethan did not look away from Victor. "No," he said. "But it will be. I need the private dining office cleared. Now. And I need your security camera footage from this floor preserved starting 30 minutes ago." The manager blinked once, then nodded and disappeared without another word. Victor looked at Ethan, and for the first time in 9 years, there was no professional polish left between them. "You are destroying a decade of loyalty over a mistake." Ethan's eyes turned colder still. "No," he said. "I am discovering what it cost me." Then he looked at Claire, really looked at her, and asked the question he should have asked an hour earlier. "How did you see all of this so fast?" Claire did not answer right away. The question hung between them, quiet and exposed, while the rest of the table waited in a kind of stunned stillness that expensive people rarely experienced. It was one thing to watch a deal turn. It was another to watch a stranger in a black apron dismantle a chief financial officer with nothing but observation. Claire looked down at the 2 slips on the table, then at her own hands. The hands of a waitress. The hands that carried coffee, folded napkins, polished silver, counted tips at 2 in the morning, and still remembered how to trace fraud in a line of numbers. "Because people who have to survive on hourly pay read every line," she said softly. Ethan held her gaze. "That is not the whole answer." She almost smiled, but it never quite reached her lips. "No," she said. "It is just the honest part." Around them, the private dining office doors at the far end of the room swung open as staff quietly cleared the space. The manager moved with unusual urgency now, speaking in hushed tones into an earpiece, while 2 men in dark suits appeared near the hostess stand, not making a scene, just standing in a kind of stillness. That said, they were waiting for instructions. The investors noticed them. Victor noticed them too. Claire did not need to look. She could feel the room tightening. Ethan set his phone face down on the table and leaned one hand against the chair in front of him, his attention fully on her now. "Start at the beginning." Claire glanced toward the bar where a younger server was trying very hard not to stare. Then she looked back at Ethan. "My father was a bookkeeper in Hartford. Small construction firm. He used to bring home receipts in grocery bags when the owner was too careless to file them properly. I was 13 the first time I caught one that did not match." One of the investors blinked. "At 13? Claire nodded once. "The mileage reimbursement was for a truck that had been in the repair shop all week. I noticed because my father had complained about the mechanic over dinner." A faint, almost embarrassed silence passed through the table. She continued, calm, unadorned, as if she were explaining the specials. "He taught me that numbers are not hard. People are hard. Numbers only become complicated when someone wants them to." Ethan did not interrupt. Neither did anyone else. "I studied forensic accounting at Columbia," she said. "Scholarship. Internship with a boutique fraud review firm downtown. Mostly expense manipulation, vendor layering, procurement leakage, executive reimbursement abuse. Not glamorous. Just patterns. Small habits. Repeated shortcuts. The kind of fraud that survives because it looks boring." Victor let out a bitter breath. "You expect us to believe she walked away from Columbia and ended up carrying martinis on Park Avenue by accident?" Claire turned to him then, not angry, not wounded. Just tired in a way only honest people ever were. "No," she said. "I expect you to believe life does not care where you were headed." The table fell silent again. She looked back at Ethan. "My father died during my junior year. Heart attack. Fast. My mother got sick 6 months later. Insurance fought everything. Tuition did not wait. Rent did not wait. Medication definitely did not wait." Her fingers lightly touched the edge of the folded slip, almost absent-mindedly. "So I left school. I told myself it was temporary. One semester. Then another. Then the internship replaced me. The city kept charging. The bills kept arriving. And people kept underestimating the woman bringing them coffee. Something changed in Ethan's face then. It was not pity. Claire would have hated pity. It was recognition. The kind that arrives too late and still somehow matters. So you never stopped looking, he said. No, Claire answered. I just stopped getting paid for it. One of the investors lowered his eyes, visibly uncomfortable now, as if the story had moved beyond scandal into something more dangerous, perspective. Victor shifted in his chair, restless, cornered. This is touching, he said coldly, but it changes nothing. Ethan turned toward him with a slowness that made the words die in the air. It changes everything. His phone lit up again. Mara had sent the full packet. Audit flags. Payment map. Vendor records. Approval trails. Ethan opened it and scrolled once, then stopped. There, attached to 3 of the reimbursements, was a digital authorization signature he knew by heart. Victor's. And beneath it, in smaller system notes, a second hidden approver field that should never have existed in hospitality coding at all. Manual override enabled by Executive Finance Administrator. Ethan looked up, and when he spoke, his voice was quieter than ever. You built yourself a back door. Victor said nothing. Because there was nothing left to say. The truth was no longer on paper. It was in the system. Time-stamped. Archived. Permanent. Ethan picked up his phone, turned to the waiting security team at the edge of the room, and gave the simplest order of the night. Bring him to the private office. Victor Lang stood slowly, but whatever power had once lived in the movement was gone. 2 security officers approached without urgency, without spectacle, the way serious places handled serious problems. No one grabbed him. No one raised a voice. That was the thing about real consequences. They rarely looked dramatic at first. They looked quiet. Formal. Inevitable. Victor adjusted his cuff one last time, glanced around the table, and saw what men like him always feared most. Not anger. Not outrage. Judgment. The investors who had trusted him would not meet his eyes. The man who had built his career beside him no longer saw a partner. He saw a liability with a paper trail. Ethan, Victor said, his voice lower now, stripped of polish, do not do this in front of them. Ethan Caldwell did not move. You already did. The words landed with a stillness that somehow felt heavier than shouting. Victor looked at Claire then, and for a moment, the resentment in his face was almost naked. You think this changes your life? He asked quietly. You are still a waitress. Claire held his gaze, calm as ever. Tonight, she said, I was enough. That was all. No grand speech. No revenge. Just truth. And somehow that cut deeper than anything else in the room. The security officers gestured toward the private dining office. Victor hesitated, then walked. The manager closed the doors behind them with careful hands, and the sound of the latch settling into place felt like the end of a chapter no one at table 12 had expected to live through before dessert. For a long second, no one spoke. The jazz from the piano drifted back into focus. Glass clinked at the bar. Somewhere near the kitchen, a server laughed nervously at something that no longer mattered. Manhattan resumed, because cities always did. But the table remained suspended in the aftermath of revelation. Ethan looked down at the 2 fake slips still resting on the white linen beside untouched coffee cups and half-melted candle wax. 2 small scraps of paper. That was all it had taken. Not a forensic raid. Not a boardroom battle. Not an expensive consultant in a gray suit. Just a woman everyone had mistaken for background. He turned to the investors. Gentlemen, he said, voice steady, this meeting is over. You will all receive a formal statement from counsel before midnight. Any exposure tied to this fraud will be addressed in full. No one argued. No one asked for spin. Men who spent their lives around money understood the difference between a temporary market shock and a character failure. This was the second one. Chairs shifted. Jackets were buttoned. One by one, they stood. But before leaving, the oldest investor at the table paused in front of Claire. He was silver-haired, broad-shouldered, the kind of man who probably had 3 homes and still ironed his own handkerchiefs. He gave her a small nod. "My daughter is at Columbia," he said softly. "If she ever sees half as clearly as you do, I will count myself lucky." Claire blinked once, surprised. "Thank you, sir." He left without another word. The others followed, each carrying with him the same private discomfort that comes when wealth has just been reminded it is not the same thing as wisdom. Soon it was only Ethan and Claire at the table, the candle between them burning lower now, the city lights beyond the tall windows turning the glass into mirrors. For the first time that night, Ethan looked almost tired. Not weak. Not defeated. Just honest in a way powerful men rarely allowed themselves to be. "I owe you an apology," he said. Claire said nothing. He continued anyway. "I tried to embarrass you because I thought I was the smartest person in the room." His eyes dropped briefly to the fake receipt. "Turns out I was just the richest." Claire let the silence sit for a beat. Then she reached forward and straightened the edge of the top slip with 2 careful fingers, the same way she had aligned silverware all evening. "Rich people make that mistake a lot," she said. Ethan laughed then, but softly, almost at himself. It was the first genuine sound he had made all night. He reached into his jacket and placed a card on the table. Heavy stock. Private number. No title printed, because men like Ethan did not need titles on their personal cards. "Come to my office tomorrow morning. 9 o'clock. Not as a favor. Not as a thank you. I want you in the room when audit opens every file he touched." Claire looked at the card but did not pick it up right away. "I am scheduled for brunch service at 10. Ethan almost smiled. "Then I will call your manager." "Do not." The answer came instantly, and he respected it at once. "If I come," she said, "I come because I choose to. Not because someone cleared my shift like I belong to them." Ethan held her gaze, then nodded once. "Fair." Another silence. Smaller this time. Softer. Then Claire picked up the card and slid it into her apron pocket. 9 o'clock, she said. Ethan exhaled, as if some internal tension had finally released. "Claire." She looked at him. "Thank you." She glanced at the fake receipts one last time, then at the door where Victor had disappeared. "Next time," she said quietly, "do not test the person holding the tray. Test the one holding your books." Ethan did not answer right away, because there was nothing clever left to say. Only the truth. And the truth, he was learning, often arrived in the smallest things. A line item. A pause. A woman no one bothered to see until she made an entire room look closer. When Claire turned and walked back toward the service station, no one in the Marlowe room looked through her anymore. Not the bartenders. Not the manager. Not the servers pretending not to stare. She moved the same way she always had, calm, precise, almost silent. But now the room had changed. Or maybe it had not. Maybe the room was exactly what it had always been. Maybe the only thing that changed was who had finally learned to see. And somewhere behind the closed office door, a billionaire was undoing the most expensive blind spot of his life because a waitress had read what everyone else had dismissed. The quiet ones were never ordinary. They were simply waiting for the world to stop laughing long enough to hear them.